All right, what I've decided to do is not continue where we left off last time. I'll just allow everybody else to make their assumptions for themselves about what kinds of things can be drawn out of history, which is pretty much known history. So instead, we'll go on to new things. For the very vast majority of the time that we've been in these classes, we've been studying the past. The very, very deep past, from the beginning of our solar system, and even going far more deeply than that into the beginning of the whole business. And last time we brought ourselves up to now and intimated very few little things about the future. Now for the next 2 or maybe 3 meetings, we're going to talk about the future. But before we do that, we have to talk about futurity itself. So the name of this talk is, Can We Know the Future? In fact, the first time I gave this talk, it wasn't anything like this. It was, I think, back about 1972 or 1973 was the first time. And my thought was really very much immature. And I don't know that it's much more mature now, because it's a really difficult subject to talk about. I've been able to draw together things on the subject that I've been holding a long time. I've been able to draw them more into a unity and to have a little bit more reality about it, but it's a difficult subject. I probably will be on the subject for quite a few lives yet trying to understand it. But there are a number of questions that it brings up, like, what is the future? It's a tough thing to think, what is the future? We can know what the past is to some extent, because that has an obvious and experienced reality, but what exactly is futurity is not clear. And then how does the future relate itself to the present? That's also not very clear, because even though we live through the transition of the future into the present, it's not often that we really understand what's going on in that. In fact, the other questions are, what is the present? That's a very difficult thing too. We're going to be looking at all of these things tonight. And can we know the present? And can we know the past? Obviously, we can know the present, or we think we can. So there are so many, because we know so little about time and the states of time, or the dimensions of time, or the directions of time, it's difficult to even know where to begin, except that we have to begin where we are, and that is right now. So, right now is right now. But that is a very uncertain thing, what now is. Because we never seem to know now, like we never seem to know yesterday. Or we never seem to know tomorrow, because tomorrow always becomes now. We have experience in now, but we really don't have much experience of the now that the experience is in. And I'm not sure that it's possible to know that, but I think it is so, and most of these thoughts are what I think about that. So, we've been talking all along about two potentials, time and space. And we've said that spirit is what understands itself relationally in the potential of time. And that matter is what is experienced or congealed in the potentiality of space. Furthermore, matter is experienced by producing forms. And spirit is further experienced through attitudes. So like you have the big potential of time, and then within that, permeating that, you have spirit. And then within spirit you have attitudes. On the other end you have space, and filling space is matter, and matter is further ramified into forms. And these form a pole or a tree, a spirit-matter continuum. I assume that the space and time and space are the same potential, just understood two different ways, one by the attitudes of spirit, one by the forms of matter. Permeating all of these, as we've said from the very beginning, with a capital C, is consciousness. The reason I think that time and space are two qualities of the same potential is because our understanding of the spiritual and material relationships that fulfill those potentials are so analogous that our language does not always differentiate between them. We can say a point in time, or we can say a point in space, or we can talk about a direction in time or a direction in space. We're going to talk more about that as we go on. But when we're talking about the present, when we describe the present relative to our awakened consciousness, we talk about it as being now. When we talk about the present in terms of space, or the relationship of form in matter in space relevant to our awakened consciousness, we talk about here. And so it's a very common human expression to say we exist in the here and now, that we exist in the present. But we say these things commonly all the time, but there's a great deal of relevance. You know, like here, from one point of reference can mean Earth relative to some other planet. Here, from another point of reference, can mean within an atom. And the nature of here and now are very relevant, and they're relevant to the focus of consciousness. And so everything that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about very theoretical, very speculative, very spacey things. And because we're talking about something that's so universal, it's going to be very relative. Everything is very relative and not at all greatly focused or pinpointly focused. So we say that we exist in the here and now. We don't know what that means. We don't know how aware we are of where here is or where now is. I'm aware of where the things are in this room, and I'm aware of where things are in Madison, and to some extent to the degree that I have traveled. I have some knowledge of where here is relative to the United States, and I have some knowledge of where here is relative to my body, which is probably the most relative of all these different knowings of where now is or where here is. I know that what I've come to speaking here has a logic that extends into what I said 5 minutes ago, that the continuity isn't always really clear. And the same thing happens with time. To some extent, without the breaks of consciousness for sleep and such like that, I have an awareness of the past going back to my childhood. So now actually means different things from different points of view. Now means early morning in China. Now means late at night in England. So what we're talking about is now can mean something different according to different viewpoints. If we have a different viewpoint from space relative to other viewpoints in space, which is all it is with the sun, like if we have a different viewpoint of the sun from China in our relationship of the earth to the sun, now means eating breakfast or waking up and having all the vigor of a dawn coming through you. So it's not really easy. It's different to say relative to the era of Christendom, we can say we're in the 20th century. And if we understand how things went through the Dark Ages and medieval times, in the Renaissance and the modern scientific times, that's meaningful. But it's relative to, it's a very relative kind of matter. So, we have time and we have space. Now we've said that time deals with spirit. And it deals with the knower, and to some extent with the known. Matter deals with the known, the things that are known, but that are also basically unknown. And we have, in time, we have an extensive kind of relationship. We say that there is a distant time and there is a close time. We say the same thing for space. We say that something is nearby, there's a high degree of propinquity, or we say that something is distant or far off. We also say that there is an intensive or a concentrative degree to both time and space. We can say that sometimes the knower or the spiritual knowing of time is very concentrated. And our experience of reality right now is very thick. It's a very concentrated time. And at other times it seems very vague. The same thing is with matter in space. That is, sometimes there's much more matter that is condensed. And that space is very, very pregnant. And in other circumstances, it seems that space, the things are much more air-drawn, and that there is a lower concentration. Somehow, time and spirit and the attitudes seem more qualitative. Form seems more quantitative. How much is there? Though they each have the opposite quality, there are qualities in that lead is different than sulfur, and there are quantitative measures of time, though even though they're less important, they're more elastic, that we can say that it takes a certain amount of time to accomplish something or to live through an attitude. Even though that the quantitative element of time is very, very stretchy. And we can also say that they both have the same directions or the same dimensions. So, since the times of Atlantis, to refer to our recent talks, since the time of Atlantis, we've had awakened spiritual consciousness. And we've been aware of time, and we have been knowing ourselves relative to the unknown qualities of matter, and that interplay between conscious spiritual awareness of attitudes in relation to matter has produced a conscious waking experience. I don't know how to say it. That's what our life is. But let's just deal with time first. This is very hard. I'm struggling because this is hard material to talk about, and I haven't really developed it this way before. And so if I'm halting and jerky and not clear, it's because I'm struggling and I'm working. When I'm working, everybody else, I guess, has to be working to understand my in-short yammerings. Time. The thing that seems to be very important is that relative to the spiritual application of attention, time appears to be more dense. So dense that it seems to stop. So there are two kinds of outlooks of time. One is that it gets stopped. It gets stopped into a moment. And if there is a moment of time where there is an event that seems great relative to all of the other non-event times, seeming non-event periods of time, it's like if somebody is having an accident or somebody is having a creative experience. What happens is, you've heard it before, you've probably experienced it yourself, that in that moment of concentrated awareness, in that moment of extreme attention, everything seems to slow down to the point where it's stopped. If you're in an accident or some sort of missile is coming toward you, or everything seems stopped and you can see everything going on, because there is much more awakened spirituality. You know more what is going on in the moment. And that is a specific moment, a concentration of time. Then there's like a vague sense of time that seems much broader. Suppose you're just lying back and listening to music that has a melody in it. You sort of understand the whole atmosphere of the music, and you feel the melody unfolding itself to you. And you can actually even anticipate what the next note is going to be, because in that very broad, vague sense of time, you're aware of the whole and how the logic, the direction, the pathway of the melody or of the air or of the theme that is developing, the logic of it, how it folds into or unfolds out of that general broad experience of a piece of music. So then there are two different qualities. One is a stopped action moment where everything seems frozen. And the other is a broad, sort of vague experience of consciousness where the events of the melody seem to languidly unfold within a general broad context. So we see then that there are basically two current attitudes about what the nature of time is. One of these attitudes is that time is a sequence of events that continues to extend itself. And this extension is not necessarily purposeful. It's completely determined by what went before it. It's sort of like ants in the Amazon that they will go marching for food and they'll come to a stream. And the first ant will hang onto a blade of grass or something and it'll drown in the stream. And the next one will come and hang onto the first one and drown in the stream. And they might like make an ant bridge right across the stream. They have an intention. The adherents of this first view of time see no intention. They just see event succeeding event, and for the most part, most of these events determine future events, but because the stream is so large, there's room for randomness that you don't know what is going on. So this is almost like the events are what are important in this view. The delineation can go wherever it wants to randomly, and the determination of it has relevance relative to the ants, but not relative to the stream. And so it's a very determined present and a random future. What is important in this point of view would be the melody. And what would even be more important than the melody would be note for note for note. And that the meaning of each successive note would come from the one previous to it. And that the importance of this would be following and keeping your attention note for note, or chord for chord if you like. The general season or the general broad-based attitude seems to be more illusory. The reality is the ant. The reality is the individual nose, and the greater reality that builds out of it is like an illusion. You can even take this point of view, and it can blow your mind. It becomes very hard to ponder. You could think of yourself just thinking in two-dimensional space, like moving from place to place. You're going from here, it's like you're lost in the woods and you sight on a tree, and you sight on another tree, and you sight on another tree, and you have a pathway. It's like going across the United States on a highway. You have a linear progression from point to point to point. However, it excludes the laterality. It blows your mind to consider that there is a whole lateral movement going forward in time, and that the individual experience of each melody, of each note in the melody, is not the only reality, but all of everything that is in existence is linearly moving forward, event by event by event, moment by moment by moment. And that's very, very hard to conceive, especially since our consciousness, our limited physical consciousness, sees only going forward one step at a time. The other view of time is to see a whole attitude of time, an experience of time that has a seasonal character to it, a basic spiritual attitude. And within that character, events occur. It's sort of like being in an arbor, a great big grape arbor. The arbor is the whole reality, but suspended within that are grapes. I don't know if you've ever picked grapes. It's a really wonderful experience. But they seem to there's all of this green foliage, and suddenly the grapes appear or manifest out of all of this green foliage. And in this point of view, there would be music. And out of this music, the notes would be hanging in clusters, sort of like grapes hanging out of the arbor. In this point of view, the great big overall gestalt is the important thing. The individual moments are also important, but they are incidental to the whole. There is a reality to this that for some people is as much real as the limited materialistic experience of the first type, the Antbridge type of time. Like, for example, Wolfgang Mozart experienced an attitude of spirit as a whole. Something like a symphony, he would know all as one, all at the same time. And knowing that, he could hear all of the different themes, all of the different metric elements, all present at the same time. Then he had, with that type of consciousness, he had a hard time breaking it down into specific one after another, after another, after another events, like notes. So what he would do, he would be holding this large picture in his consciousness. He'd go to a pool table, and he'd just bounce pool balls around, and from them he would have something phenomenal to take to unwind the universal idea that he had. This is also what is behind that famous German word, Zeitgeist. The spirit of the times. That is to say, there is a quality that we could call our times. We run into this a lot with journalists who say, what are the 80s like, and what are the 70s like, and what are the 60s are like. They build from events to the attitude rather than from the attitude to the events. An occultist would claim, obviously, that the zeitgeist really is a spirit, and that successively different archangels take over different periods of time and imbue it with their spiritual consciousness, with their attitude, and that there is a spirit of the times. In the same way that the former view of time is a view of time that is materialistic, and it is a view of time that is based on separate, contiguous events. The latter type of time is a time of moments. I put the S in parentheses because it's not clear whether the moments are plural. The latter view of time, the view of time as a moment or of moments of time, is more what spiritual students find to be the reality, though they don't deny the outlook of the event view, the contiguous event view of time. The mysteries teach things according to the philosophy of moments. So that's what we're going to spend most of our attention on. We're not going to try and take a highway, as some politicians would like to do, and broaden it, change it from 4 lanes to 6 lanes to 8 lanes to 22 lanes until it covers all of everything. And we're not we're not going to try and drive all the way around the earth in it. That would be that would be expansion of consciousness according to the event theory of time. Both views of time are subject to illusions, but the idea of a moment represents the quality of presence. And obviously, the presence that is in that moment is spirit with a capital S. God is. And it is this experience of presence, this experience of reality, that is what time is all about. It is. And a moment, or the moment, is whole. It's balanced. It's unified. You can't say that part of the experience of a moment of time is less aware than others. It's a constant unity, but above all, it is a whole. When one experiences a moment with waking consciousness, one experiences a whole of a moment. Now that moment can be an event. And for most people, it is an event. Because it's limited to that one little bitty, I don't know what you would call it, division of time. All the dimensionality of a moment is unified. It's all balanced. Things and events manifest within a moment. So that if your moment is large, so that you're actually experiencing the zeitgeist, like suppose there seems to be a 300-year cycle of change of consciousness between different archangels, you can be experiencing that zeitgeist and experience an event that comes out of that time very clearly. But the event is part of the whole. It's like a droplet in a cloud or a droplet within vapor. You still do experience events, but you experience them relative to the moment. The moment seems to be expandable. And so what we're calling the now is the awareness of the presence of the moment, of the spiritual attitude in the moment. The degree of awareness depends on our concentration. The more we give our concentrated attention to life, the more vivid the moment and each event within the moment. The more thorough, the more full. And the more we concentrate our attention in the moment, the more we have an understanding of the dimensionality and the greater the extent of the moment. So, what we call span of attention determines intervals between moments. The reason why time seems to be so separated into events, it's like the days of our lives. We sleep, we lose consciousness. We don't have a span of attention that covers the nights or whenever we sleep. And so we have these broken gaps in the experience of the moment, and we have this event-like consciousness. And to a large extent, we cannot... Oops, I'm clicking the microphone. To a large extent, we cannot continuously give our attention to the moment, and so we have breaks of time, which can be kind of dangerous if you're driving an automobile. I've noticed that in the past 20-some years, 30-some years that I've driven an automobile, my driving has gotten better because I'm more awake, I'm more aware, I'm more alert, I'm more conscious of what's going on, and I attribute that to trying to pay attention. So the span or the extent of attention is extendable. For some people, they can only hear note after note. Some people can only hear a melody. Some people can hear the melody as it gets redeveloped in a theme. And some people can hear that theme with other themes developing a general motif or a leitmotif. And some can hear all of that within the consciousness of a movement. And then some people can hear that within symphonies, wholes. And eventually it gets like what some people are, events as notes are representative of a focus of a drone. A drone that's going on ever and ever continuously. And that the intersection of drones in the awakening consciousness of all the spiritually evolving beings is what makes the music of the spheres, so to speak. And that our making of melodies or of airs or of developing themes is a matter of understanding general drones by focusing on them relative to each other. So you know what I'm saying then? I'm saying is that chaos, as we've talked about the spiritual worlds, chaos is like hearing a constant drone, sort of like when the symphony tunes up. All of the instruments, he won't bother me. Don't get nervous. I'd sooner have Willie having a good time than you nervous. So chaos is like all of the notes droning presently at the same time, plus all of the rhythmic intervals there. All of these things are constantly there all of the time. So we see that higher consciousness is able to understand the moment in a larger sense. And it can understand the whole attitude of it, the continuity of it, a greater extent, and the actual intent, because this is spirit. Spirit has intention. Now, obviously, this expanded moment. Oh, he's tired, huh? You can take him next stairs and lay him downstairs on the sofa downstairs. Poor little guy. And he says, my moment, he has needs that are very demanding. Obviously, if we live in concentrated awareness, if we know what is going on, the larger extent and thoroughness of our awareness of the moment covers both past and future to a lower type of consciousness. You understand what I'm saying? That what is something that is someone's past or someone's future relative to a small consciousness that goes day by day by day, if one has focused the attention so that the moment is experienced more thoroughly, more totally, that moment takes in the events that most people would consider the past or future. And it even takes in all the lateral events that may be associated with any particular event that one might experience that they don't even know anything about. It's possible to step into a moment that has an event of someone's experience and to see other sidelong events that have that the person didn't even know anything about. Even to walk into different areas of space, so to speak, that were involved in that moment at that time, if one has the expanded focus of the motion, of the moment. In that moment, you can see the grapes that are all over the arbor. Even the grapes that, from one point of view, are only coming into existence, and they're still little tiny flowers yet. So that the moment from this point of view takes into account memory, history, and it takes into account theory, and it takes into account potentiality, takes into account consequences that from the present are extending into the future from the event linear point of view of time. It takes into account becoming. So a moment has a realization of what would be called the past and the future in all of the things that are there. History, memory, experience, potential, consequences, and a general broad spiritual becoming. Kind of ludicrous talking like this, because all of this talking is still delineatory extension. And if I could experience the moment, or if we could co-experience the moment, all of this talking would be silly. You know what I mean? It's all present all at the same time. We save a lot of tape that way. Applications of understanding. When we look, there are moments that we can experience that by. To some extent, reading a history book, if you read it fast enough, is like experiencing a moment. Or, if you can keep the whole consciousness, hearing a symphony is like experiencing a moment. There are even more concentrated experiences. Looking at a horoscope is an experience of a moment. When you look at a horoscope, you see a whole life relative to that one seeming event, the center of the moment, the birth. But you also see what is ripe from past lives that have gone into the forming of that moment. So looking at a horoscope, even without progressions or transits or anything like that, you can see a whole life. Wow, you're the fastest gun in the West or the Midwest. Wow, I've never seen such a fast change. The primordial atom. What we've been talking about, this grand spiral of spirit and matter within time and space, with its periods of time and its globes of matter and its revolutions of consciousness, that is also a moment. That in understanding that, we can understand the moment of the whole creation of the cosmos that we are in. That's what we're trying to get to with talking about the future. That's why we're even talking about time at all. Spirit has intelligence. And this intelligence, to our consciousness, pervades all of time, such that there is a logic or there is a reason through cause and consequence how the past in relation to a creative free agency is expressed into the future. We talk about as you sow, so shall you reap. That's all part, if we could understand it in the total moment, that's all part of a continuity of intelligence in spirit that maintains a logic. And the internal logic, that unity that spreads across it, is the divine, and the relationship of cause and effect are just two faces of one unity of intelligence. So in some ways, it's almost safe to assert that the past is the known. It's the spiritually assimilated. Time and history are associated with that. Space is sort of flat in the past, but time is all-knowing. Future represents the unknown. It's the spiritually projected rather than the spiritually assimilated. Spirit is flat, and the opportunity is filled with space. It's a pregnant space in the future. These can be seen as poles of time. So the present is what spans between these two poles of the known and the unknown, and it is the bridge across which the intelligence brings one into the other. And events, you might say, are the steps of the one within itself, less like steps walking across the bridge, more like steps in a logical formula that you can go back and do over again without having to turn around and walk back. So this brings up a number of other questions. Are the dimensions of time and space ultimately the same? Is our physical structure what produces these illusions? Because from a spiritual point of view, it almost doesn't make much difference about present and past, because both of them are all present. You see what I'm trying to say? If our bodies are such that we have eyes only looking forward in the direction that we can propel ourselves, this leads to a kind of illusion. And this illusion is that there is a forwardness, and there is a behindness, and the forwardness rules the future, and the behindness the past. One could think that those are accidental illusions that produce our sense of consciousness in that way, and that there would be some sort of grand relativistic way that they wouldn't make any sense. The spiritual student would say it's the other way around. It is, we can only experience in the beginning a little bit of self-consciousness, and therefore our limitations with the perception of reality, both material and spiritual, have to be limited. Our limitations are there for our own good, and that the panoramic consciousness, when we will be able to look in all directions and dimensions at the same time, will succeed from this. Plus, there's also there is also some purpose to all of this. Obviously, what is the future to us is not the future to the gods, clearly. Because the gods live in the greater moment. And because they live in the greater moment, the limitations of our moment, they are not subject to. And they don't need that kind of ignorance in order to have this sequence of consciousness. But this illusion of event succeeding event, of things being separated, is all important. Because out of this is where the becoming takes place. It is as if to say that if we don't take on this limitation, nothing gets accomplished. And there are people, commonly they're called, you go out in the countryside and say, oh, he's only a dreamer. There are people who only dream, and they live in a way in a broader moment. It's a very vague moment. And they can never increase the dimensions or the intensity or the richness of that moment because they don't take on the limit of events. They're like a grape arbor that doesn't bear fruit. And so even though there is something very illusory about the material view, the eventful view of time, we can't fall prey to this thing that once we understand the bigger understanding that we give up the smaller understanding. Even though there's something very illusionary, something very limiting, it is through this limitation that the becoming actually becomes, that the arbor bears fruit, that the symphony can be played at all, is dependent on the taking on the make-believe, the urgency of the moment of taking the known and actually going into the unknown, into ignorance, and making something of it. So, in a way, from the viewpoint of the gods, the future is already here. And one can almost say, like Christ, consummatum est. It is accomplished. And when he was talking about that, he was talking about something that extended a very, very long period of time. Now we have to be careful of this, because this kind of consciousness can lead to a deistic kind of approach. It can lead to a point of view where that the experience of reality is all that there is to it. That we're just sort of walking through the experience of reality, and that's all there is. That the divine has this universal intelligence, and that the creatures walk through the scenario of the divine cosmic intelligence. It can get pretty bleak. However, it's part of reality. A big part of reality is living it through, living it out. There's something much more that comes out of it, but basically on a simple level, we have to live it out. And all the much better if we live it out by appreciating it. Like appreciating the experience of life day by day, moment by moment. This can also lead to a very deterministic, laissez-faire kind of experience. One can say, why do anything? Because it's all going to happen anyhow. If we're just experiencing it, why do anything? I'm not even, one could say, I'm not even convinced that the walking through it, the experiencing of it is worth anything. And that all sounds like a bunch of Pollyanna nonsense to say that you appreciate it. It can get pretty grim. Then the best that we can do is to concentrate our attention and fully experience reality and appreciate it. That's fine. It's wonderful. For the most part, if we did that at this period of history, I think we could be very, very successful. Because it strikes me that myself and quite a few people that I see around me are not experiencing life, are not appreciating it, are not seeing what is there, or not living what is there. But is this the same for God? Is this experience of what we call evolution or creation, is this merely a discovering what's there and that God is doing it on a grander level? Some people think that way. It's called predestination. And some people even have a predestination for the divine. And for such people, and there's some validity to this point of view, but it's not total validity. Suppose you were in a pitch black, dark night, but somehow you had an idea that you're in the middle of a forest and you're groping around in the dark, and you get an idea that if you rub sticks together, that things won't be so black. That you'll be doing something anyway. And finally, the friction of life results in a spark. And that spark, by blowing on it, a little coal-like spark, you can bring it to a flame. And with that flame, within this pitch-dark forest, you then have a little sphere of light. And with that sphere of light, you could see that there are more sticks around. And you put them on the fire, and the fire gets bigger, and the sphere of light gets bigger, and soon you see that those sticks come from trees. And one can look at the whole of creation if one has this view for that it is, even for God, not only a walking through, but just a discovery of what is there already. That the fire gets bigger and bigger, and the enlightenment becomes grander and grander, and enters into greater dimensionalities and such like that. I think that's a valid outlook for the nature of reality, but a very limited one. Though we might have a lot of illusions and misunderstanding, our experience is different. We have freedom. We have freedom to accept the experience of reality. We don't have to, but we have freedom to accept it. We have the freedom to appreciate it. We have freedom to choose whether to accept it or to appreciate it or not. And we have freedom to choose what experiences are in it. We can choose allowing this to happen to us or that to happen to us. And we can go even further, and we have the freedom to choose by action what takes place, what will take place. In short, we can do something about it. We know from our experience that we can make our lives something better, that we can do something with them for ourselves and the world and those that we love in the world, and we can choose by action. And to some extent, though it's very minimal at this point, we can choose to create. That is, there is a potentiality even in the realization of things within time and space. And that potentiality allows us to create even in the moment of the now, and that the potentiality for creation doesn't only lie in the future. That in the now we have creativity that takes us on into the future. So, applying the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, the other way around, so below, as above. If we realize all of this freedom, and the highest part of it being creation, creating out of the potential, or creating into the potential would probably be better, then it is the same with the divine. And moreover, we know more than that. We know that within the moment we are potentially co-creators with the divine. That we can create in the moment along with the divine. Thus we can see our experience is manifold. On one hand, we're creatures. We're products of the creation in the moment. We live. We are things. We are objects within it. On another level, we are experiencers of the moment, which is what we've been talking about mostly tonight. We aren't just objects moved around in the moment. We are self-conscious experiencers of the reality of the moment. And then we are also creators within the moment. We may be limited by how much we can create. We may even be limited by our creature ignorance. But even those limitations work to our good. So we are limited by our materiality, and we are unbound by our spiritual nature. Thus, the interplay between the freedom of spirit and the limitation of matter, the limitation of our creaturehood versus our thinghood versus the unlimitedness of our divine creative being, gives us a constant interplay. So I want to sum up a few things before moving on to the next few little topics I have to say. And one is, there are 2 points that I really want to remember and emphasize very strongly. Even though, to some extent, reality is limited by the interplay of the microcosm and macrocosm in consciousness, the more we give our attention to the moment, the more we live our lives into the moment, the more we concentrate our attention, the larger, the more real, the more full the moment will be. This is really important, that this is what living our lives means. We can pay attention or we can not pay attention. And the more we pay attention and how we pay attention determines what the fullness of time and space is going to be for us. We can know more of the past than the future. We can know more of what is behind and before us, what is within and without. All of those things by giving ourselves. I didn't complete my notes here. I got interrupted. The second thing is, the more we give of ourselves, the more we can experience creativity. Both of these are unlimited. Life can be more rich, more full, more total, and we can be a joyous part of making it unlimitedly. Even without action, other than action of attention. Sometimes action is almost to a detriment. We do all of this busy work but not doing any real work. In short, we can know more of reality. We can interpret the past. Creatively, we can interpret what the past experience was without having just lived through it, but we can creatively interpret the past with regard to intent. And the future, we can create the future also in terms of divine intent, so that the future just doesn't happen to us, and we just don't sequentially carry out. So we know history as creatures, now as knowers, and the future, our destiny, is as creators. Okay, now there have one or two more little points to make here. Obviously, I put in an enormous amount of time over the years and this week to put all these notes together. I thought this was only going to be an hour. Boy, we have to talk about peculiarities in the experience of the moment, especially the enlarged moment. The process of expanding the moment into what is called the past or the future is a process of applying attention. But it's a very curious thing that the applying of attention is much more a matter of acceptance. It doesn't seem to be an overtly or aggressively active thing. The applying of attention is like, it's a contradiction of words almost. It's like giving acceptance of the moment. There's a great deal to do with the center of our spiritual being in the experiencing of the moment. And we have to both give and accept to experience the moment, but it's all very, very subtle. Going along with this, even though there is greater intensity in the moment, the experience of the moment has greater relaxation. I think sort of like what athletes or musicians describe as getting loose is what is involved in the experience of the moment. And even though there is greater concentration of attention, there's still greater subtlety and greater rarity in experiencing the moment. So the application or the giving, which is at the same time an acceptance or receiving, you'll notice that all of this is exactly like a perfect prayer. I have Steiner to thank for that, because all of my notions about time relate to the experience of prayer, and that's exactly what Steiner said the experience of prayer is like. That it is both a giving and a receiving, a giving and an acceptance. Now, the attitude then of giving, receiving the moment is peculiar. The psychology of it is a remembering type of quality. Do you know how it is when you're trying to remember something? If you focus your attention with narrowed brow and pained expression you won't remember. Probably have only synaptic memory. If you're relaxed and if you're open, when you do remember something, there is both a giving of attention and a relaxation. This same attitude of remembering works for the future. You remember the future. The psychological attitude of remembering the past is like the psychological attitude of remembering the future. They have that same kind of quality of intense relaxation or giving in relaxation. And the same is also true that when we interpret the past and find the meaning of experiences that we have gone through, either in our own lives or in history, it has a quality of discovery, and that quality of discovery is extremely similar to the quality of memory. The process of creating something into the future, even a speculation, has that same quality. And I think that that quality of giving, receiving, the two-way street, that presence of relaxation, of creativity, and of memory, because memory is more associated with the experience, and interpretation, creation, is more associated with the creative part of it all, I think is the experiencing of divinity. That the knowing of the moment is experiencing the divine. It's not a mere busybody looking at to see what's coming up in someone's future, or of digging up dirt about their past, or having a curiosity about what happened here or there. All the moment expanded, intensified, all of that is the experience of divinity. Because divinity is the unifying agency. Then the beautiful thing about all of this is not only can we accept and appreciate the destined future, not only can we create the undetermined future, not only can we turn more of the future into the latter from the former by becoming more godlike, that is, we can make more of our future undetermined and free by living the divine, cosmic, godly life, and less of it determined and creature-like. But the beautiful thing about all of this is, the really beautiful thing, is we can do this at our own pace. Again, it's like music. You can play a piece of music at a very slow tempo or at a very fast tempo. You're free. To some extent, inherent within the primordial atom, within the divine plan, and our creature quality in it, we're carried along by the momentum. But we've seen already that a person can straggle, that they can fall behind and produce more friction. The beautiful part is that we can go forward we can experience the primordial atom in our own time. I don't like to use the possessive pronoun. In a time not the same, or at a pace not the same as the normal pace of the primordial atom. As things are right now, we can't just disappear into the future, even if we make a lot of jump steps. But we can, within the reality of ourselves and our abilities, manifest the qualities of spirit, the awakened attitudes of spirit, and the potentialities that they have on matter, and the experience of the unknown in matter. We can know them now. We can be them now. This accession of the rate or of the pace of evolutionary creative experience is called initiation. Initiation means not just being accepted into some sort of order or organization. It means initiation into the process of evolution and being divine within it. And all of the experiences or states of the divine in its process of creating and knowing out of the potential and unknown of space are within us. And initiation or initiations are the process of voluntarily giving, accepting in such a way that we experience and interpret, that we create and become. That is what initiation is. It is a process of extracting the essence of the past as soul by creatively reliving it. Knowing ourselves now as the agency of being able to do that. Knowing ourselves as divinity and anticipating what we will become in the future and living into that with the essence and energy that we have extracted from the past. This experience of initiation takes place parallelly on various levels. It is first a transcendent experience, and later a phenomenal experience, and much later a cosmic experience. So what we're going to be talking about for the next few talks, they may be very few because of the limitations of time. We just said the time was unlimited because of the limitations of space, I guess. They may be very few. Tonight we didn't talk about the flavors of time. We didn't talk about the spectrum of time, but that is what we will be talking about in future talks, and what is before us, so that we can willingly give ourselves to life now, and as we have strength, digest the past and become it into the future. And so that's what our talks are going to be.